Well, welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to talk about 6 of the biggest myths that Shaun has encountered through millions of conversations over the last 30 years.
Yeah, probably millions.
And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been pretty consistent, some of the biggest ones that he sees, and they probably come in different forms, but there's some underlying similarities. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. All right, Shaun, so I'm going to open it up with the first myth here. We see this countless times. Never touch your capital. Live off the interest forever. And I think another version of this you're probably going to touch on is live off dividends from your principal amount. So maybe take it away from here.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a very common myth. It's not necessarily a myth for everyone, but I'd say for the vast majority of people out there, it is a myth. And I think you're right. There's a pervasive idea that I can just generate some dividend income and just live off the dividends and make sure that the goose that lays a golden egg is just protected, right? So that's an aspirational goal, but it's not a realistic goal for most people. And what you begin to find out is that taxation, dynamic spending, and life events get in the way of that aspirational goal. So, give you a quick example. We have a TFSA account, we've got a non-registered account, we've got RSP RIF accounts. Each of those accounts are generating dividend income distributions, and we're looking at the overall goose that's laying those dividend eggs. But each of those accounts have very different tax treatments. So when we put together a retirement income plan for people, what you begin to see is different dollar amounts coming from different accounts. A good example would be in the early years, you might put more pressure on your RIF account to deregister, get that money out at a more tax effective rate. Well, you're going to put a lot of pressure on the portfolio. You're going to take out more than the dividend distributions from a tax standpoint to leverage the tax brackets. That right away gets in the way of that plan. And of course, you can see life events come up, surprise expenses. That is the norm. The norm is not this linear, just live off the income. So life events, dynamic spending, tax planning often will get in the way of this aspirational goal. It's a great goal. It's a simple sort of narrative when it comes to planning, but it's not realistic for most people. And that's why it's important to have a plan to sort of map out what the reality is going to be.
Yeah, the reality is often different than these little bumper sticker sentences. All
Exactly.
right, so myth number 2. You need about 70 to 80% of your current income in retirement. Is
Yeah,
that
and
true?
so this myth actually is true up to a point. What surprises people quite often when they retire is they're sort of used to getting their pre-tax income. So you get your pre-tax income from your employer, let's say, and then you've got source deductions and group benefits and maybe employee share purchase plans and group RSPs, and then you got your tax. And then you look at the gross and look at your net and look at what you're getting in your bank account. Often what we see is when people retire, the amount of pre-tax income that's needed to generate the same net income they were used to before they retired is not as much because you don't have all those source deductions. You're past that point. So you just generate the taxable income, pay the tax, net the income, and it's usually a percentage of their previous income. So 70, 80% is not unrealistic in most situations. So that's great, but things are dynamic. Just like in the previous point, there are things that get in the way of that from a practical standpoint. So usually when we sit down with people and map out the plan, we're building in things like periodic expenses. What happens if you need to, replace your vehicle? What about maybe spending a little bit more money in the early phase of retirement for, vacation and travel and that kind of thing. So again, a great aspirational idea. Initially, 70, 80% can make sense, but real world events will get in the way of that. So you have to be flexible in terms of your approach.
For sure. And could it be lower if you're a single person going to retirement?
Yeah, it could definitely be a lower because the same logic applies.
Mm.
That's a really good point, Josh, because the one thing I didn't talk about is just basic income splitting. So what's interesting
Yeah.
for a lot of people is when they retire in a couple situation, they can now income split much more effectively than what they couldn't at all when they were both working full time. So in a couple situation, unfortunately, the tax code is kind of biased towards couples. In a single
Yeah.
situation, you're going to have to generate more pre-tax income to net the equivalent, household income because you may not have the income splitting ability.
Okay, great point. All right, myth number 3. I need $1 million or insert some magic number to retire. Is that true?
Well, it depends. It could be true. It could be true for you. I mean, it's just tragic how when it comes to retirement income planning, we use rules of thumb or There's bumper stickers. The banks will do studies and they'll throw out, you need 2 million, you need 1.5 million, you need $1 million to
Yeah.
retire. Well, those bumper stickers or studies are completely useless. I mean, they
And the
don't need.
assumptions that they throw into these models are they can affect it so much.
Oh, absolutely. So you look at every individual is unique. And so we have lots of clients when we've done the number crunching for them, they're now launched into retirement. They did not need $1 million to live
Yeah.
comfortably and to pursue the things that were important to them. So the things that you need to take into account is number one, what's your age of retirement? Obviously, if you retire younger, so aspirationally you're retiring at 55, you're going to need a lot more capital. So you want to get really
Yeah.
clear on what that is because it'll be many years before your government benefits kick in. So it puts a lot more pressure on your portfolio. What about
Mm.
jurisdictions? Where are you living? Right. So different jurisdictions have different tax rates. What about your lifestyle? Well, maybe you have cheap hobbies, doesn't cost a lot. Others of you have more expensive hobbies. What about your
Mm.
health? Some of you have health issues, you have to pay for costs there. So every single situation is unique. Do not use rules of thumb. Don't look at these numbers like I need $1 million to retire and then be discouraged. What you want to
Yeah.
do is do some planning, find out what your number is, and it will be specific to your goals, your age, your hobbies, and your tax jurisdiction and how much after tax income you're aspiring to.
Yeah, it's crazy. Even in conversations with my peers, the $1 million number to them sounds really low. To them, $1 million doesn't sound like a lot. Like I hear people saying 4 to 5 million at retirement and I'll be good. And I think in working on plans, you can see like a million might even be high for some people.
Yep.
Especially obviously if you're going to retire at 55 and you're probably going to be really active between that 55 and kind of when
Yeah.
you slow down, you're going
Yeah.
to need a higher number, but you sometimes don't need a ton of money to retire. All right.
Yeah.
So next myth number 4, I'll never be able to save enough for retirement.
So this one ties into the previous point. A lot of times people are surprised or discouraged. They watch the news. There's reports about, the retirement crisis, and then you kind of get into this sort of funk about why even try? I mean, it's
Yeah.
too late for me. And what I would say is, again, I may not have had millions of conversations, but I've certainly had thousands of
Probably close.
conversations. And I certainly know that from experience, I truly believe this. It is never too late to plan. And the reason for that is it takes people from a situation where they've got their head in the sand, they're in denial, they really don't want to face reality. And what I say to people is face reality, begin working on the plan. You will be able to achieve a certain level of income security as long as you begin to look concretely at your situation. There's always
Yeah.
something that you can do.
Yeah.
So it's never too late. You need to get a plan in place. Don't put your head in the sand. And so
Yeah.
we see a lot of really surprising situations where people come in the office, they hire us to do a retirement income plan, they come in discouraged with the process, very encouraged because there was light at the end of the tunnel, even though they were quite discouraged. But it's helpful to have someone look over the shoulder, be objective, help them face reality, but also work out the tangible steps they can take to be on track to some level of income security for retirement.
For sure. And I think that last foundational point there on the screen in green, start small. If you're young and you're like, oh, my income's not very high, I'm not gonna be able to save for retirement. Well, lucky for you, the income's almost secondary to your time horizon. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
small contributions over a 30, 40-year period would blow your mind at how much the compound growth can be.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, myth number 5. I'll need the same income, obviously indexed to inflation, every year in retirement. Is that true?
So again, it kind of gets back to some of our previous points. It's this belief that our retirement income needs are linear, so they're
Yeah.
kind of consistent over time, and that just isn't the case. So one of the things that people need to sort of get out of thinking is, I've got again the goose that lays a golden egg. It's going to generate dividends, and that all will be good. Or I just need a certain level of income, and if I index to inflation, I'm good. We never see that.
Yeah.
Life is not linear. So again, you're going to see variability to inflation, which is going to be impacting your costs. Think of if you're retired and we hit 2022 when inflation went up dramatically in a 1 year period, and it's never really come down from that level, right? So that's not linear. You now have had to readjust quite dramatically in terms of your costs, and now you're locked into a higher cost that you need to absorb now. And then you'll have surprise costs. That's going to be for sure a situation that you'll be in. So no, it's a myth. It's not going to be the same income. I mean, if you view your income from your investments as a pension, it's going to be indexed. I guess that's a good starting point, and then you can budget around that number, and then pull in the belt a little bit when you have surprise expenses. I mean, that's all well and
Yeah.
good, but generally, you see a much more dynamic flow to income needs.
And I think one of the things we do when we do retirement plans, which is kind of related to this, is we can model a consistent drawdown versus a drawdown where you have go-go years, slow-go years, and
Yeah,
no-go years, right?
yeah.
And there's going to be different, and you can mess around with those numbers to find a system that works for you or
Yeah,
strategy.
and so that's a really good point, Josh, and that is that we're so used to this linear approach from a paycheck standpoint.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of self-employed people, their income be more dynamic and they're used to that. But if you've been a salary professional or you've got a salary you've been making over the years, you've always had to base it on a linear spend. Now, when you go to retirement, it's the first time that many people have ever had the experience where they can actually customize their spending
Yeah.
on the reality of their retirement. And the reality
Yeah.
is this: you're going to have more energy. You're going to be wanting to do more things in the early phase of your retirement. And so you're going to see that dynamic spend where you'll spend a little bit more on the front end for traveling or hobbies or that kind of thing. You'll begin to see that, you'll the go, then the slow go, and the no go. But even the no go, usually it looks more like a smile, right? You see a spending at
Mm-hmm.
the front end, a slowing down of that expenditure pattern, but then you see some healthcare costs begin
Yeah.
to come back into the back end of the planning. And so it's really important to sort of just face reality that dynamic spend is going to happen for sure.
For sure. Yeah. All right. Myth number 6, and this is the last one. If my investments average X amount returns, my money will last. Now, this is a common one we see a lot at every age.
Yeah, it's the linear return model.
Just
And
10%. Just 10% every year.
yeah, you'll be good, right? So,
Yeah.
what do I need to make to achieve my goals?
Yeah.
And in almost every financial plan, retirement plan works at 10%. So there's all these competing interests. When you build a plan, yeah, we need to nail down what kind of returns you need to get, and if you average that return, you're going to fund the retirement income needs. However, there are trade-offs, and so
Yeah.
the slide kind of speaks to that. So one of the trade-offs is sequence of return risk, right? So sequence of return is, yes, I'm expecting, 7, 8, 9% a year, but I could be losing money some years. So if I'm going to get a portfolio strategy in place that has a potential of getting 8, 9, 10% per year, that portfolio is going to have a fair amount of potential swing rate year by year. And it's not
Mhm.
going to average that, 7 or 8, 9.
So,
It's going
so
to
are
be
you
variable.
saying the risk arises when you have poor returns at the beginning of that retirement period?
Yeah.
It
And,
can,
and
yeah, okay.
in fact, one of the things that our planning software does, we call it the randomized return sequence. It's a modified Monte Carlo where we go, okay, we're going to assume that your portfolio, let's say, is a balanced portfolio, you're going to average 5.5% per year over the length
Hmm.
of your retirement. That's linear. And then I go, everything works fine. But then I run a nonlinear sequence of return profile. And I go, average the 5.5 between now and your age 90. But how we get there is going to be variable. And in fact, we're going to model what happens if you get a whole bunch of negative returns in the first part of your retirement and you have to
Mm.
absorb that? Well, that can change the profile of your retirement quite significantly.
Yeah.
So, whatever return you use, that will drive a certain kind of investment mix. And that mix can drive a certain investment profile from a swing rate standpoint. The more growth assets or stock assets you have in the portfolio, the more of the swing. And then I think you have had some comments on protective strategies that you can put in place to deal with that.
Yeah, timeline strategies is a cool conversation, and I think the way we normally frame it is you break it up into 3 main periods, right? You have your first short-term needs, so that's what 1 to 3 years out,
Yeah.
where you're a little bit more conservative or you're quite conservative with your money in cash or cash equivalent. You don't want that volatility that you'd see with a longer time horizon. Then your middle years, 5 to 8, 5 to 10 maybe, or 3 to 10, you go with a little bit more in equities. You can deal with a little bit of volatility because your horizon's longer in that middle period. And then your long-term planning. Now, if you're young, this is kind of like your retirement years. But when you break it up like that, you can manage these risks that we see on the screen here.
Yeah, and so the way you want to view retirement portfolios using the timeline strategy is you literally have 3 different portfolios.
Yeah.
So you have one portfolio that's going to fund the liquidity needs potentially over the next 3 years, another one years 4 to 8, and then another portfolio is going to fund income needs down the road, not for another 8 years.
Yeah.
And each of those portfolios will have different risk profiles and return expectations. And so It's a really important part of planning. So it flies in the face of this myth. My investments just average X%. My money will last. That's just not how it works in the real world, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you sit down with your advisor, or when we work with clients, we go through, do the planning, get very specific about what they need from their portfolio in different years of the analysis, and then develop the investment memo to mirror that requirement.
Right. And I mean, the myth ignores the idea. Like if I'm in 100% equities and I need the money in the short term, well, that's going to affect my X amount, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why the planning is so important.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all we got for today's video. Shaun, if there's anything you want to add at the end here.
No, I think that covers it. For those of you watching the video, if you are thinking, I'm not sure that I got a lot of clarity in terms of my planning, make sure you
No,
go to the show notes. Number one, there's free resources you can access. And number two, I'd like to have a complimentary consultation on our services and get your own customized plan. There's a link that takes you to our website so you can learn more information about that
for
process.
sure. Yeah. Go down to the description. All right. Awesome. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Take care.